Okay, so I'm not doing much sailing at the moment, so there's not going to be a sailing film, and I almost wasn't going to bother making a film. I am doing quite a bit of work on Seahorse, getting her ready for the next year. But it's, and I know a lot of you like watching that, but it's all pretty tedious stuff. It's nothing unusual. I'm not doing no special projects this year, so I'm just fairing the hull, anti-fouling, service the engine, polish the top sides, that type of thing. And although I might be able to make a film out of it, there's only so much that sort of stuff you can watch, and to be honest, it slows me up. And we've had a couple of good weekends of weather so far in January, so I wanted to crack on and kind of get it done before it turns. And I couldn't really spare the time waiting for it to. I couldn't really spare the time filming it all. But that said, I thought I'd take this quick bit. It's Sunday morning. Izzy and Hannah are at hockey. I've just been down the boat. I've put some primer on some bits. I've come home waiting for it to dry. I thought I'd just quickly touch on one thing that we get loads of comments on our films, but the one question, if you like, that's often asked that I never really address is, or I haven't addressed for a couple of years, is how our camera gimbal works on the back of the boat. How we get shots a bit like this. So as you can see, basically we film ourselves sailing along. And to start with, when we first started doing this, we used to just stick our camera clamped to a tube on the back of the boat. And then we realised that actually you're a bit close, you want to get further back. So we came up with this system, which we still use, of tying the tube that we clamp to our boarding ladder. Our boat has a closed transom, it's not an open transom that you sort of walk onto, and consequently there's a fold down boarding ladder on the back. So we lash a pole to the boarding ladder, and then we fold the boarding ladder down, but not all the way. Tie a bit of string so it stops how far it goes. That bit of string, by the way, has a small plastic clip on it, so if we ever fell in and needed to climb up, a good yank on that would break this little plastic clip, and we'd be able to use it as a boarding ladder like we intend. But for the purposes of putting the camera, it just holds the ladder in the right place. So it puts the ladder further back. Because one of the first problems with putting your camera on a pole on the back of the boat is that you need to be able to switch it on and off. So you can lash a pole in position, but unless you can reach the camera, you can't use it. And of course, by definition, if you like, if you can reach it, it's probably not far enough back. So our solution, though not perfect, is the easiest way we've got of doing it. So to start with, we used to just lash the camera to it, and then a couple of years ago I came up with my first gimbal, which I did make a film about. I'll put a link where these things go somewhere on the screen if you're curious, but basically it looked like this. Let me get on. Looked like this. It was an old camera bicycle clamp, used to put on a bicycle handlebar, which I kind of cut around with a small stainless steel universal joint. Oh, and here's the cat. Hello, Tilly. And then a counterbalance weight. And it works quite well. In fact, it worked very well. The two downsides to it are that this one moves in every direction. And although you want the camera gimbal to adjust for the boat leaning over, because it makes it, you can see it sailing, you don't necessarily want it doing pitch, because boats tend to naturally pitch over waves and the camera gimbal gets out of whack and it all goes mad. But other than that, it worked okay. But so to try and overcome this pitching thing, I came up with the Mark II gimbal, which I haven't got because I've kind of broken it up to make the Mark III, which I'll show you in a minute. But basically, I made my own, not universal joint, but my own pivot out of a 3D printed part and a couple of bearings and a bit, and you'll see most of it in what I'm going to show you in a minute. And that worked great. The downside to that was I used an old aluminium arrow from a bow and arrow, proper bow and arrow. It's very high, very light, very rigid aluminium, which was great because it's light, but aluminium, although you don't think of it as a spring, has still got a degree of spring in it. So when the engine's on, it would start quivering and you get some blurred bits. Most of that I tend to cut out, so you don't tend to see it, but trust me, it gets a bit blurry, and you would have seen it on some of it where I couldn't avoid it. And then the other problem is that the trick with these gimbals is that you've got the weight on the bottom needs to be only just enough to overcome the weight of the camera on top. If you make your natural thinking is to make it heavy, but if you make it heavy, it just acts like a pendulum. And it, because this hasn't got the camera on it, it's very heavy. It acts like a pendulum, which A, gets out of control quickly, and B, it takes forever to dampen down. But if you make that so that it's only just heavier than this, you don't get a pendulum effect. When you move side to side like this, like that's wiggling all over the place, it stays upright and just moves parallel, which is good. Except there's not much then keeping it pointing down. Which brings me on to the Mark III, and I'll show you the problems I've addressed, and then we'll talk about the problems it's going to have. So the Mark III is now a carbon fibre tube to overcome the springiness that I was talking about, because carbon fibre, although it's bendy, isn't springy in the same way. So it'll hopefully damp that out, yet to be proven. Here's my pivot, 3D printed part. Ball race in each end of here, flange bearings, a little pivot point here that goes all the way through, and then I have a nut which I put a little knurled bit on there so I can adjust the tension of it that goes there. And then on the Mark III, I've now got this model car damper with some oil in it, which will hopefully damp out the movement. So, and I, of course, actually another thing I should mention, action camera on the top. I bought this was a fairly early 4K one I bought a couple of years ago. But it was like 20 quid, not, I'd say early. It's an early one because I bought it second hand. I paid 20 quid for it and it's been brilliant. It takes those normal kind of square batteries that a lot of these cheap Chinese ones, I don't know, I've never had a good camera to know what batteries they take, but they're generic things, you can get them everywhere. You can buy these now from Amazon for $14.99 or something with 2 or 3 batteries and all the gear on it. I mean, it's just so cheap. But anyway, this one's done us proud. Used a waterproof case. I never close a waterproof case. I know that seems silly on a boat, but the trouble is, because we tend to keep our camera on for a long time, we'll switch it on and we'll leave it running for an hour. What happens is with all these cameras, they get hot, and then because you're in a wet environment, any moisture in that case, just the humidity, ends up misting up the lens. You must have seen some of our films where the picture gets a bit misted up because it just can't be avoided. So I've now found it better to just leave the case open. So it's in there, so it's kind of, to a small extent splash proof. It keeps it off, it protects the camera, but it lets the air venting out, so I don't have any misting problems. It just means if it's raining, I can't really film. But then, to be honest, if it's raining, you only need a splosh of water on the lens and you can't see anything anyway, so I don't worry about it too much. Anyway, back to the gimbal. So cheap action camera, gimbal. It's a shorter weight, shorter at the bottom, but I've got heavier weight on the bottom, but the net result is it's still balanced. Like if I move that, you don't get any pendulum effect. That's the beauty of keeping the weight on the bottom just only slightly heavier than the weight on the top. If I took this camera out here to reduce it, and now I move it side to side, oh, okay, the damper's doing its job. But trust me, without the I've moved it slower, and you can see it. It starts to build up a pendulum effect. But with it balanced, let's do that thing again. Even moving slowly, it doesn't spring, you see. So anyway, the last thing then, the damper, to try and damp out this movement. But as you can see, it still takes a long time to damp that out. It's a balancing act. The problem is, if I make that a heavier damper, so that it will control that bouncing around much quicker. Yeah, what it tends to do then is not let the arm centre itself perfectly, so the whole arm is just slightly crooked. So I've kind of found a kind of I think this is actually 3-in-1 oil actually in this. It's a kind of a nice mixture. There's a little bit of damping there, but not too much that it jams it up. The other problem I've got is that the engineers out there of you will notice that I've mounted that damper, you can kind of see where it is, in such a way that it means that at the central position there's very little damping movement. The damping movement gets more and more pronounced as it moves away from centre. I could have overcome that by effectively mounting the damp horizontally, and the linkages would get slightly more complicated, but it becomes bulbous then and awkward and more likely to get broken. So I thought this as a compromise was worth having, especially because, you know, when it's going to do its most work, it's when the boat is heeling over because I'm bouncing through waves, and then the piston is actually at its most effective.
Actually, as I'm editing this, I realise there's one more thing I haven't spoken about, and that's the length of the pole I've got the camera on. That's deliberately long so that I can keep the gimbal itself low in the boat with the pole raising the camera up, and that means then as the boat leans over, the camera stays pretty much in the middle. If you have the camera up high and the boat leans over, the camera tends to move to one side of the picture, or at least it has the effect of making the boat look like it moves to one side of the picture. This just helps alleviate that. Anyway, back to what I was saying.
So, anyway, that's what I came up with. You can judge for yourself over the next year's sailing how effective it proves to be. But we like it. In practice, there'll probably never be a Mark IV. I might tinker with this, but what we really want is a 360 camera. I don't know how much of you lot have been watching camera developments and what people do with 360 cameras and stuff now, but we don't want a 360-degree camera so we can film everything and so you can move around and look at everything, because to be honest, I think that's a gimmick and I find it just irritating. But with some clever editing, what a 360-degree camera does is it'll film everything and then lets me, when I edit it, show you the bit that I want to show. So if I've got a 360 camera, I'll stick it up there. I don't have to worry about what direction it's pointing and what's happening with waves, because when I get to editing, I pick the picture that I want to show and I can keep that in focus. And then if, say, a boat's coming behind us, I can pan round, because I can use the 360 effect to show the boat passing behind us. So when we're racing in that, you'll get much more of a sense of how close things are and where other boats are on the racetrack. And of course, I can also be filming the boat behind and me in front at the same time, because it's filming everything. Except, of course, 360 cameras are very expensive. There's three problems. They're very expensive. If anyone wants to contribute to the cost of making these things, feel free. They are quite power hungry, and of course a sailing race, any sailing we do, you don't do it in 20 minutes. It takes hours. So I really need either one that can last hours, either has changeable batteries that are easy to change, or more likely one that I can connect to a 12-volt power feed somehow. Easier of course with 360 because I won't need the gimbal, so it can just be solidly mounted. But I don't know how many of these 360 cameras at the moment kind of let you do that. And then the other problem is that because you're filming everything, it's taking up a lot more, it needs a lot more memory card space. I mean, a 4K camera, when you do it in 360, is almost not good enough. You need 5, 6, 8K camera to get a good quality 360 film. And then that needs big memory cards, and you've got to write them quick. I mean, I think the GoPro one uses 2 memory cards, presumably because you can't write to all of them quick enough. Anyway, that's the future, and one day we will get to that point. But here and now, for the coming season, this is what we're going to use, and we'll see how it works. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'm Ian. This is Sailing with the Foxwell family, and yeah, hopefully we'll get out on the boat soon. Right, Tilly, you're feeding. I know, I just said that. I'm not feeding you.